Hi everyone and welcome to the tutorial. Today I will be demonstrating how to work the 3-needle bind-off method. This is a great way to join two pieces of knitting as you do it while you're knitting, so there's no cutting your yarn and using a tapestry needle afterwards to join them. It's particularly useful for when you need to join a shoulder seam on a sweater. You will end up with a slight seam from this technique, so it's up to you whether you want this to be a decorative element or if you want it to be hidden on the wrong side of your work. I would like it to be hidden on the wrong side of my work, so I'm going to show you how to do this with the seam on the inside of your knitting, but otherwise you can have it as a decorative element as well. So your written instructions for this technique will read something like the following. You need to ensure that your live stitches are on 2 parallel needles. You need to hold those needles with your left hand with the needle tips pointing to your right. You then need to take a 3rd needle, which is inserted knitwise into each of the first stitches on your parallel needles. You wrap your working yarn around the 3rd needle as if to knit and knit the 2 stitches together, slipping them from the parallel needles. And then you begin a repeat, which is to insert the 3rd needle knitwise into each of the next stitches on your parallel needles, wrap working yarn around 3rd needle as if to knit, and knit the 2 stitches together, slipping them from the needles, and then pass the first working stitch on the 3rd needle over the last, which will bind a stitch off. So we'll see what that looks like. As I said, I'm going to work this technique on the wrong side of my work, so what I want to make sure is that the right side of my work is facing together and the wrong side of my work is facing me. So as my written instructions said, the first thing I do is take a 3rd needle and I insert it knitwise into the first stitches on each of my parallel needles. So what I've done is inserted the needle knitwise into the stitch on the front needle and then knitwise into the stitch on the back needle. So my 3rd needle is going through 2 stitches there. I then wrap the working yarn around the 3rd needle and then knit those 2 stitches together. So I draw that yarn through both stitches and then I slip them both from the parallel needles. So what I've done there is basically knit a stitch on each needle together, which has gotten rid of a stitch on each needle, and it's created 1 stitch on my 3rd needle. I then begin my repeat, which is to do that step again. So insert the 3rd needle into each of the first stitches on the parallel needles, wrap the working yarn around and knit those stitches together. And then to bind off, I need to pass the first work stitch on the 3rd needle over the last. So I just use one of the needle tips on my parallel needles to do that. I insert into that first work stitch and bring it up and over the last work stitch, just as you would in a normal bind off. And what that's done is it's begun to connect these 2 pieces of knitting together, and in the process I'm getting rid of my live stitches. So see what that looks like again. Insert the 3rd needle into each of the first stitches on the parallel needles, wrap the yarn around and pass the first work stitch on the 3rd needle over the last. And there I've decreased 2 stitches. So what you'll hopefully begin to see is that there is a seam happening. It's these V's that are traveling along the join. And that can look really nice as a decorative element in your work if you want to feature it, but I don't want to, so I'm working it on the wrong side of my knitting. So you just keep continuing to repeat those steps. Insert the 3rd needle into each of the first stitches, wrap your working yarn around and bring the yarn through both of those stitches. Hopefully you can see what's happening there. And then pass the first work stitch on the 3rd needle over the last. And we'll continue to repeat that until all of our stitches have been bound off. So once all your stitches have been worked, you should be left with just 1 stitch remaining. We pull that stitch nice and wide and draw our yarn through, pulling the stitch to tighten, and then you just cut that yarn to finish off your work. And there you'll see we have a seam from where we worked the bind off, but it saved us a lot of time in needing to bind off the stitches and then sew them together. And you'll see on the right side of our work, it's produced a really neat finish. So that's the 3-needle bind off method. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the tutorial, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, do leave them below.